Hello! Today we're going to be talking about autobattlers as a genre and the mechanics that they use, games where the battling happens automatically and the player does other stuff. Usually there's some kind of strategy in how you build your team, what kinds of items or bonuses you give them, and where you position them. This is another video like some of the ones I've done in the past about UI and roguelite mechanics, where I'm going to talk through games I've played critically to see how they're designed and see what I can learn from them. Because, hello, I'm Savalian. I make videos about games, development, and creativity. I've been working on a game for the past few years that started off as a heavily TFT-inspired co-op auto chess game, and after working through some of the problems and going through some big design changes, it's now more of a single-player roguelite auto battler, so it's a similar kind of game but with focuses on different things. I will also mention now that to keep this video from getting too long, it's probably already going to be pretty long, I'm going to skim over a lot of the features in these games and really focus in on the mechanics that I feel are critical to the auto battler genre. So these won't be complete reviews of the games that I'm mentioning, but I may do a full review of some of them because they were pretty good. The first game I want to talk about is the game that started it all, Teamfight Tactics. This game just really hooked me. It's a solid auto chess game starring a subset of Riot's League of Legends characters as the units. And before we get into gameplay, I want to share something really funny that happened as I was making this video. I needed some gameplay footage to show off the mechanics that I want to talk about, so like normal, I started up TFT to play through a game just like I've done dozens of times before, and this time the entire game was like different. I was so confused. They did like a huge update. I've been playing TFT pretty casually but consistently since it came out, since season 1. And I even played a game just a few weeks ago. But with this new set, they overhauled a bunch of the game. They added like a legend that controls everything that your team does, and you can pick how the progression goes with the minions, and it's just really bizarre. The UI has changed as well, but I wasn't really prepared for this. The core gameplay at least seems to be the same, so for this video I'm going to talk about things as they have been for the vast majority of TFT's lifespan. I'm sorry if it's a little bit different now and it doesn't quite match up, but I'll get some time to play through the new version soon here. So let's pretend like nothing has changed, and we're just gonna talk about auto battlers. This is the most complex and the most widely played auto battler that I know of and that I'm gonna talk about. Made by Riot, it has extremely high production value. It's competitive as an esport on an international scale, and it's being updated all the time. So there's a lot of things going on with TFT that I just don't have the resources to replicate with my team of one single person. But we can still learn from some of the things that they're doing and see what we can do. And I would say after playing so much TFT that there are really two main mechanics that make it really engaging. The first is the team synergies, and the second is the economy. A fairly common auto battler feature is that each of the units has some traits. Whether it's a class or a role or a specific ability, whatever it is, their traits determine how well they work with other units in the team. TFT has an enormous group of units in each set, and every unit has at least one trait, some have as many as 3, and then you have the synergies, which is when you have different champions with the same trait. You can unlock bonuses. Some of the synergies are simple stat increases. There's usually one that gives a bonus to everyone's attack speed, another one that offers magic resist, and so on. But there's always a couple of trait bonuses, a couple of synergies in each set that do something a little bit fun, a little bit crazy. In what was, I think, my favorite TFT set, Galaxies, I believe it was set 3, There was a trait where if you had all 3 of the champions within that trait, they would combine into a big mech. That was a lot of fun. In a recent season, there was a trait called Legend, where at the start of battle, other units would be sacrificed to make the legend stronger. And these fun, whimsical synergies is one of the biggest reasons why I keep coming back to TFT. The excitement of getting new synergies every several months, figuring out which ones are really powerful, which ones are just kind of silly, and which ones are like, you know, utilitarian but very effective. Playing with the different synergies and seeing how the synergies themselves work together is just really fun. And it's also fun, even if they're not good options, to just play and see how they work and what they look like. So I think, you know, that team synergy is one of the biggest features of auto battlers, and I think TFT does this incredibly well. And that brings us to the next mechanic, the economy. So in TFT, and in fact in all of the auto battlers I've got in this video, you don't just get to pick whatever units you want freely from all the ones that are available. There are limitations on what you can pick, usually with some randomness involved, and that makes managing your resources and building your team have a little bit of an edge on it. It adds a little bit of a challenge. In TFT, you get a random selection of, I think, 5 units every round based on your current level. So leveling up is one thing that you need to balance with all of this to control which units you get. And another trick is that the pool of available units is shared among all the players. If one person buys a certain champion, there's one less champion available for everyone else. And the supply is very low for the top tier champions, which you can only get if you've leveled up enough. So trying to get those units that you need to do the synergies that you want is part of the game. It's part of the strategy. You have to look at what other people are building and try to predict who's gonna want the same champions as you, and if possible, beat them to it. Or pivot. Not too late in the game though, that's how you lose. So managing your purchasing power, or whatever it is another common auto battler feature, whether it's gold coins or, well, I was gonna say like mana or something, but actually I think all of the games that I have in this video do use gold coins. Which is a little funny because they're very different games. But in any case, you have to balance how much you're spending on units against how much you're earning, how much you're leveling, how much you're re-rolling. In TFT, managing that level that I mentioned is really important because it controls which units are even possible to show up. If you're not high enough level, you will never see a 5-cost champion, and if someone else is leveled up faster, they will see it before you do. So having this economy that is directly connected to other players in the game adds like another dimension to the auto battler, because you don't just have to build a strong team, you also have to play other people against themselves. And I think that's really what makes it an auto chess rather than just an auto battler, is that mind game. You have to try and figure out what your opponents are going to be doing. Now, swinging wildly from one end of the complexity spectrum to the other, the next game I want to talk about is Super Auto Pets. This might be the simplest auto battler that exists, at least the simplest complete auto battler that I've heard of. There are no roguelite elements, no metagame, even the PvP is very pared down. There's no direct interaction with other players. It all happens sort of asynchronously based on what turn you're on. It's an auto battler boiled down to its very core pieces. So you pick your units from a selection. It's the same sort of marketplace that TFT has. It's a random selection that levels up as you get further in the game. If you think about it, there are only 3 player mechanics in this game at all. The first is buying and positioning your units. The second is buying and using items, and then re-rolling. Everything else is automatic, and it just sort of happens, you know? It's a simple game, but if you've ever played it, you will know how addictive it is. And part of the game that really drives me to keep playing is actually just the achievements. There's a big page full of all the available units, all the animals you can pick, and each animal, if you level it up to max level, you earn the achievement for that animal. If you win a game with that animal, something I'm really not very good at, you get another achievement. There's like a star or something on it. It's very much like a Pokedex to fill up, which I like a lot. And you also see something I didn't mention in TFT that I should have, is that they have this merge 3 method of leveling up your units where you buy the same unit and combine them, and then they get more powerful. So we have the same thing here where you can make existing units more powerful by dropping the same one on top. It levels them up, gives them a little bit more powerful of an ability. Some of the other auto battlers use a different leveling method, so this is just one way to do it. And just like with TFT, there are certain combinations, certain teams that work really well together, and it can be hugely satisfying to build a team that hits really hard or does something that's a little bit silly but effective, like the elephant can hit its own teammates, and that can trigger if they have an ability that happens when they're damaged. Or like how the whale literally eats a teammate and spits them back up when it dies. And the abilities themselves are pretty simple. Each animal has one ability. It describes in the text exactly what it does. There are certain points in the battle where it can happen, say at the start of the battle, at the end of the battle, when they're damaged, when they do damage, things like that. So it's very clear when things are happening, what order they're happening in. And so the player is able to take that information and make a strategy without leaving anything up to chance, which I also think is really important. I don't think auto battlers benefit from having chance in the battle. I think the battles themselves should be very predictable based on the teams. And then if there is some randomness, it should be elsewhere, like getting new units or in like events that might give you a little boost or something like that. So I think Super Auto Pets is a really great example of getting a very small set of features really tight and having your whole game just work together really well. I know a lot of people who have gotten addicted to Super Auto Pets because it's super fun. It really is. Next, we're getting into new games that I've tried. All the ones from here on out are ones that I bought for this video to support my research, and these are my very first looks at these games. The first one is called Jess King. This is an early access game, so take these criticisms gently. The game may change. It's not complete yet. I don't want to drag anybody, even accidentally. And unlike all the other games on this list, this one is an action auto battler, which sounds a little bit bizarre. It's not a pure auto battler. You do control the movement of the team, and then their abilities are what are automatic. So it kind of behaves a little bit like Vampire Survivors, except you have multiple characters that you're moving around at one time. The runs are structured like a typical roguelite, where you have this randomly generated set of rooms, and you can pick from a couple of options which room you want to go into next. And then periodically you get into a room where you can buy new units or get items or things like that. This also uses the merging method of leveling up units. It's fairly common. And the units do have traits, like in TFT, that can combine in different ways to unlock bonuses. These are shown along the side of the team menu, and for some reason I didn't really notice them at first. But they are called synergies, just like in TFT. We also have a lot of the same shop mechanics here that were present in the other games. You get a random selection of units, you can re-roll if you don't like them, and this game only has 4 slots for units, which is a little bit small comparatively. And the center is reserved for the king, which is the unit you're guarding. If the king dies, the run is over. I think my biggest criticism, and this is true for TFT as well, is that the character descriptions are a little bit dense. It's not always clear at a glance what sort of role a unit should play TFT actually, in that big update I mentioned, did add some icons that say whether a unit should be a frontline or a backline unit. But before that, and also you still do need to do this to some extent, they have all these descriptions of their abilities, descriptions of how they behave, and it's just a lot to learn. And I think that some of the games that I'm talking about make it much clearer where the unit should be, what they're gonna do, how they're gonna behave. And so I think that could be improved here. And because I had a hard time really understanding the units, I couldn't keep them alive very well. They would sometimes do things I didn't expect, which is not something I want in an auto battler. Some of this is on me, like games do often have a learning curve. Maybe I should have taken more time to read through how they behave and what their abilities are, but I do think, like I mentioned, that there are ways to demonstrate the role of a character and give hints as to where they should be positioned and how they should be used that make it so your players don't need to sort of research the game before they can play it effectively. And TFT in particular is very bad at this. You basically need to look everything up on Mobalytics, so I'm not by any means saying that they do it much better. It's just a thing I noticed. In the end, I think the action part of the auto battling is not really vibing with me, and this is something else that may come with practice and with learning the units and the enemies better, but I found myself pretty frustrated with the battles themselves. One thing that might help this without sort of redesigning the game would be to make my team's abilities more visible. I feel like I wasn't getting a lot of feedback on when they were attacking, how frequently they were attacking, and how effective the attacks were. It all kind of got lost. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of like status text and things popping up, and it's just hard to tell what's going on. So maybe this one's not for me, gameplay wise, but I did think the character and the enemy designs were really cute, and the music was amazing. I was seriously jamming to the music from all 3 of the new games that I picked up. I don't know how this happened, but every soundtrack was like 100% bangers. It's incredible. Meanwhile, TFT doesn't even have music. It's like just quiet with some announcements in between, but I would say that this game could be good for people who want a little bit more hands-on of an auto battler, which, as I'm saying it, sounds wild, but I think you know what I mean. But it is, like I said, in early access, and presumably has more content along the way, so maybe I'll give it another look a little bit later and see how it's coming along. The next game I almost didn't pick up because it was a little bit more pricey than the others, but I'm glad I did. It's called Despots Game, and it has some interesting differences from the other auto battlers and a lot of similarities, as you'll see. First, I need to mention that the art is really good for this game. It's very out of character for me. I usually do not like pixel art, but I really love the colors that they've used, and the pixel art is detailed enough that I feel like I can really see what's going on, which is my biggest complaint for a lot of pixel art, is that it's just too like abstracted for me to understand. And the animations are really well done. It's a very nice looking game, and it has a kind of synthy 80s sci-fi feel to it, which I am a big fan of. And again, the music is so good. It's so good. It's perfect. As far as the gameplay goes, it has the same roguelite framework that Jess King has, but instead of selecting rooms on a map, you move by picking a door to go through, and then you could see what's behind that door and what's like around you now that you've moved. And the first interesting deviation from some of the other auto battlers is that you have to feed your units every time you move. So this puts a natural limitation on the size of your team, and it does encourage you to make a team that is smaller and a little bit more efficient, as opposed to some other games where having more units is always better. Food can be purchased, or you can cannibalize your units if you need to. It adds something to sort of balance out the purchasing of units and items. And in a way, auto battlers in general are really about resource management. The goal is to use your resources effectively to get units get money, get items, and combine them in a way that's going to help you win. And then this game just adds an additional resource in the form of food. There are various ways you can get it. You can get it from like events, you can buy it in certain rooms, or like I said, you can sacrifice your units to turn them into food. So it's very interesting. And another quirk of Despot's game is that instead of buying the units with traits on them, you assign the traits with items that come up. So the items themselves are offered in the randomized way with an increasing level that you can also upgrade. You know, in the same way that TFT and Super Auto Pets works, where if you upgrade the shop, you get better stuff. You want to balance that out with buying things to help you get further in the game. And more interesting, you can sometimes get items back if your units die. So when you buy an item, you're not necessarily just buying like one unit that is a tank or a shooter or whatever role that item gives them, but you're potentially securing that role for future units if the unit that you're buying dies. So it's kind of an interesting way to do it, and I was a little bit on the fence about it. It felt needlessly complicated until I started to play and see the parts of the game where it really helped out. It really helped me strategize a little bit better. So I think I'm coming around on this one. The synergies in this game are simpler than some of the others. Each unit has just the one item, which assigns them a role, and they are mapped one-to-one with other roles. There are a few different kinds of roles, but it's not as flexible as a system as TFT or Jess King, where they have multiple traits potentially combining with different members of the team. Another thing I really liked about Despot's game is the indication of where enemies are spawning. It's kind of just a minor thing, and Jess King did this as well, but there's just a skull on the ground to kind of show you where the enemies will be positioned, and they're bigger if they're stronger enemies, and that's enough to give you an idea of how you should plan. And I've been wanting something like this in my game for a while, and I haven't really worked out how to do it yet, but it's something that I noticed and that I thought was really good. They also level up units as they get battle experience, which is something I didn't really think about, and I'm interested in seeing if this will fit in my game. And the reason they do this, I believe, is to incentivize you to keep your units alive through multiple rounds, because the units are pretty cheap and you sometimes get items back. It can be tempting to just sort of throw away your units and buy new ones because they're so cheap, and you can sometimes get upgrades that will just give you 3 new units all at once, totally for free. So by doing this, they're giving you a reason to keep them alive and really try to make your team as strong as possible, and it's just an interesting way to incentivize certain behavior. It's very simple too. And the only downside that I noticed in this game was that while you can click on units to see their health, there's no overview of how your team is doing in the middle of a battle. And this made it very difficult for me to understand how evenly matched my team was to the enemy team, and like how quickly I needed to upgrade my units. It kind of went where I would go through a couple of rooms, and unbeknownst to me, my team would get a little bit more hammered each time, and then eventually they would kill a bunch of my team, and that would kind of be the end of the run. I think if there were little floating health bars, or maybe an overall team health somewhere that I could reference, it would make it a lot easier for me to judge how well I was doing and whether I needed to make a change before it was at that point of no return. And the last thing is that I think this game could have really benefited from an obvious goal, like a greater goal. They had this kind of mystery, like we don't know why we're here, we don't know if we can get out of this dungeon or whatever, but I was missing a point. I think I would play this game, I would try out all the units, and then at that point there wouldn't really be much left for me to do, because I'm not sure what I'm earning by doing more and more runs. And so that's kind of what was missing for me. That's not really an auto battler thing, that's more of just a game thing, but it's something I noticed. In general, I really like this game. I think the art's great, the music's great, the game loop is satisfying to a point, like I said, but it's a nice game, and I might do a full review on this one. I don't know. We'll see. The last game I'm going to talk about is The Dungeon Beneath. This one really took me by surprise. I've been playing it all week because it's really good. And again, this one has an absolute banger soundtrack. It's amazing. You can actually see my mouse kind of swaying to the beat in a lot of these clips because I was seriously jamming out. I was having a great time. In this one, there is a specific end goal. It's a little bit mysterious, but there is a boss that you're supposed to defeat, and it has that same roguelite room by room progression that some of the other games have had. I really liked the tutorial in this one because it was clear enough that I didn't have any trouble figuring out how to play, but it wasn't like a separate scene, it wasn't a whole thing, a special level, it was just pop-ups when I needed them with just the information I needed, and then they went away. This one is really friendly to beginners, and I liked that a lot. The big feature they drive home in this one is positioning. It's very important where your units are and what order they can attack in. Some units can only attack from the front column, some can only attack from the back column, and then some will also have abilities where they will buff other units in their row or column. So you have to think about all this stuff as you're playing, and it makes for some really interesting team compositions, which is obviously the other thing that we talked about. The team building aspect, as I said, is really important to auto battlers, and all of these units have two traits basically, their race and their class. There are no separate synergies exactly, but there are some unit abilities or some items that work on other races or classes, so it's kind of like synergies, but it's very specific to each run that you're doing and the items and the units that you're using. I had one hero, for example, that would buff fellow dwarves. I had another that would give an attack boost to lizard folk specifically. And then there's a lot of units I haven't unlocked yet. There's a little bit of a meta game where each run gains you experience and unlocks new things, so it gives you that goal that I was looking for, something greater than the individual runs, which I really like. I was also impressed by how interesting the enemy units were without creating like a bunch of extra game mechanics. They have just a few mechanics. There are differences in how they target opponents. They could gain attack power or shields or armor, or summon additional allies, more enemies. And all of these things are things that you can do on your team as well. And so it's not a complicated system. It's fairly simple, but the descriptions that they've added and the enemy designs that they've done and have made it really cool and creative in a way that I really appreciate as someone who also aspires to make, simple systems that can be extended in a lot of ways. You can level up the units in this game as well with XP potions that drop sometimes as a reward, and each time you level a unit they can hold an additional item. So you have to decide which units you want to prioritize to level them up, and what items you want to get for them. It's really important to weigh these decisions because you can only have I think 4 non-hero members or maybe 5. Certain heroes or items let you have a bigger team, but it's fairly small. There's only 6 spaces aside from the hero space, so that's really all you've got. The difficulty progression in this game is really finely tuned as well. The enemies at the beginning of the run are pretty straightforward, and then as you get further, they get a little bit more tricky. Often they'll start summoning friends to help them out. They'll have more complicated patterns, like they'll move and they'll gain armor, or they'll gain attack power based on how many enemies are alive or how many player characters are alive. And then even further in the run, the rooms themselves will start to have environmental effects. So it gets slowly more difficult as you get better at managing your team, which just has a nice flow to it. I didn't feel like I suddenly got to a part that was too hard. It was very gradual, and the fight that ended my run was pretty close most of the time, which I think is important, because if someone's playing and they get to a certain part of the game and they just get stomped, it can feel very discouraging, and they may not be willing to try again soon. They may want to take a break. So getting the difficulty progression right is really important, and I think this game did really well. I did get to the big bad boss. I think his name was Illifar or something. I got to him once. I couldn't quite take him down, but like I said, I've really been enjoying this game. I think it's my favorite one that I tried this week for the first time. It's a well done example of an auto battler. It's got a good amount of strategy and positioning without being, you don't have to have 100 wikis open to do well at this game. And then it's just got that dash of roguelite to make things a little bit spicier and to make the game flow a little bit better from run to run. So this one definitely would recommend, and I think I learned a lot from it as well. So if I have to summarize the lessons that I'm gonna take for my game, first, I learned that I really need to revisit my unit selection system and make it more intentional. I think more of an intentional team building experience. Every auto battler relies on combining units in a certain way to achieve a certain result, and so far I don't really have that. I have some units that are tanks, some that heal, some that are focused on damage, but there's not really any consequences for picking one unit over a different unit, and currently you can just pick whatever you want as long as you can afford the summon cost, and it doesn't introduce player choice that matters. And I need a change here to really bring the team building aspect into my game and add a little bit of pressure to the management of resources as well by making the player choose whether they want to spend more to find certain units, spend more to level something up. If I decide to have like a shop leveling system like a lot of these games have, I have a lot of thinking to do here, but I think I'm on the right path. I think I understand the systems a lot better by looking at all these different games. And a big part of adding consequence to the unit selection is adding synergies in some form. I had something like this earlier in my game's lifespan, but I took it out because it didn't feel right. It wasn't quite what I wanted, and I just want to add a little bit more room for whimsy, the way that TFT does with some of their synergies. I'm not sure yet if I want to add traits to the critters or use their roles like Despots game does, or if I want to do items perhaps and do it kind of like that, but I want to do something to make these unit decisions build up as you create your team, and just to make the decisions matter a little bit more. Another thing is really more on the roguelite side of things than the auto battler side of things, and that is that I want to build more of a structure to the progression. I'm unsure if I'll have like a map like some of them do, or something pre-designed like TFT, but I want to add more clarity to what's coming up in the run to give the player some time to prepare their team. Right now, the enemy waves do scale in difficulty for my game, but it's completely hidden from the player. They can only see the relative difficulty of the upcoming wave and not what's coming further down the line. And so I want to add to that and make it a little bit more clear, and really show the end goal, which it doesn't really exist yet, either for the run or for the game as a whole. But I want to add more of that in there to give the player a reason to keep playing. But those are my thoughts on what make auto battlers fun. A couple of lessons that I'm going to personally implement in the design for my game. If I forgot to mention it, I think I did at the beginning, I've been working on an auto battler of my own for the past 2 years, and it's getting really close to being done. It's currently untitled and does not have a Steam page or anything, but if you want more updates and to hear about future dev vlogs, don't forget to subscribe. And if you have any recommendations for auto battlers that I should try, you can leave those in the comments down below. I have a lot of fun doing these game mechanic deep dives that I've been doing, and I hope they're fun for you as well. I'll be back soon with another video about games, development, or creativity, and I hope to see you there. Thank you so much. Okay, bye bye.